need some ends. I got a spot cased out, I'm breaking in. I got a cutter that'll cut through your window like butter. Suction cut, window up. Now I'm on the inside looking for some loot. 38 special, I don't wanna have to shoot. I ain't no young, raw, fresh recruit. Steel toe boots, black khaki suit. A real quick search and nobody's home. Just like I planned, now I'm home alone. I hope you don't mind if I use the phone and fix me something to eat before I'm gone. I got the silver and the china, deuce 5 and the 9 Rolex off the desk, so I can tell the time. No one knows where the flow goes when the dough grows. You better take some no-dose. Now I'm out the back with a sack full of goods. Throw it in the truck, take it back to the hood. Let me be brief, I'm on the creep. I stole the sounds out your Jeep. It takes a thief.
Yes, today is It Takes a Thief Day. It's a show about heists. We're going to begin with the art heist in Paris in October at the Louvre. We'll talk a little bit about heist movies, and then we'll talk about possibly, at the end of the show, my favorite heist of all time. It would be the great maple syrup heist. There is a maple syrup reserve, believe it or not, in Canada, and they got a pretty big chunk of it. All right, so, but to begin that, we are going to revisit, actually, somebody who's been on the show before. Leila Amineddoleh teaches art crime at New York. This, by the way, is not a course about how to become an art criminal, okay? Art crime is just studying it. So it's not a vocational program, is what I'm saying. She teaches art crime at New York University and cultural heritage law at Fordham Law School, the chair of the art law group at Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogin. And it's great to have you back on the show. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be here again.
So let's just remind people that on October 19th, thieves did, in fact, break into the Louvre, stole an assortment of royal jewels. Since that time, it appears that they made a number of mistakes, but since that time, a whole bunch of people have been arrested. Some of them have been released. In fact, you know, crime in France, even formal charges in France sound a lot cooler. Like one of the things I think that they're charged with is association de malfaiteurs. You know, it's criminal conspiracy, but it sounds cooler in French. Anyway, tell us a little bit about how you see this particular art heist, how it kind of fits into your understanding of smart things that thieves do and kind of dumb things that thieves do.
So this crime is actually very unusual because these kind of cinematic heists from major museums is actually really rare. The majority of art crimes are really mundane. Thefts from storage units, theft when objects are in transit, thefts when people simply forget what their property is. They may overlook property in their home. Someone comes in and takes a work, and that's a crime of opportunity. So it's actually really rare to have these kind of blockbuster crimes.
Yeah, actually, let's take a beat on that, because I think you make some great points in the stuff that you've written about this. For example, there was a Chagall that was stolen. I forget from which museum, but they didn't know it was stolen because, I mean, most museums have 10, 15, 20% of their properties on display. Everything else is in storage. They don't have as much exhibition space as they do have holdings. And that was the case with the Chagall, right? The museum didn't even know they didn't have it.
Yes, it was the Guggenheim Museum in New York, and it went missing from storage from an employee. So most of these thefts from museums are inside jobs, people who have access to the works that might not be thoroughly inventoried or cataloged and may go unseen for decades.
And I think the Guggenheim is one of the hilarious things about that, as I understand it, they just sort of said, let's just sort of change our inventory list. So we never had this thing, which it was an interesting way of sort of solving the problem through accounting.
Well, yeah, and also avoiding bad press. They don't have to announce it. No one knows about it, kind of keep it hidden. And, museums have the incentive to do that because when a theft occurs, it's terrible publicity. They may lose potential donors. People are scared to loan art to museums if they think that museums aren't adequately securing and monitoring art. So it's a bad look for museums.
Hey, let me ask you a question about this, and this might be something you don't know the answer to, although there don't seem to be many things about this topic you don't know the answer to. But I also have wondered, I'll give you a concrete example. In 1982, the FBI busted a ring of thieves who were planning to hit the Hillstead, which is a little museum in Connecticut, but it has this amazing Impressionist collection. And it turned out that, and maybe we'll get back to this, this is one of the gigs where they were thinking maybe they would sell it back to the museum at a lower rate. And even in the New York Times coverage of that, the FBI approximated the value at $25 million, and the museum immediately said, oh, no, this is like 10, 15 million. I'm thinking museums also don't want to go around trumpeting how much their stuff is worth, especially in those scenarios where the art might be sold back to them, because you'll pay a higher price if the thieves think it's, or know that it's worth more.
Yeah, I think you're right that, the more valuable the work is, the more likely it is that the work might try to be, thieves might try to steal the work. Generally, museums are not in the practice of paying ransoms, though.
Mm-hmm.
That's generally the perspective that U.S. museums take, because if people see that there are works that can be taken and that a ransom can be easily paid without criminal charges being pursued, then again, you're giving more incentive for thieves to steal art. So generally, museums don't pay ransom. And what the practice is today is that rather than have the work circulate on the market, potentially enter the legitimate market, or have the work circulate on the black market, museums and institutions publicize the thefts to make it unprofitable for thieves to steal the art.
We should, there's a lot in what you just said here. And just to circle back to that Guggenheim thing, my recollection is it turned out that, it wound up in the possession of some, law-abiding people who didn't know that they had a stolen work of art. I would assume sometimes this passes through a few hands. So by the time they got it, presumably, at least according to them, they didn't know they had anything stolen, and some kind of deal had to be worked out.
Yeah, that's what's so unfortunate about these cases, that sometimes we have two innocents. And there are court cases that have addressed this issue, and the courts really struggle with this. Sometimes we have the innocent original owner and then a good faith purchaser that may have purchased an art through a legitimate gallery that got it from another party, and another party. There's, sometimes there's a long chain, and then we have two innocents. So then we have these resulting court cases where a court has to decide who did what's right, who did what's wrong. In the Guggenheim case, it's really unusual that the museum wasn't really reprimanded for hiding the theft. Actually, we want museums to disclose that information so that people like the good faith purchasers don't fall into the trap of buying stolen art. And generally, U.S. law really encourages that behavior by an owner to seek your stolen art, to perhaps, to report the art to law enforcement, to create a record of theft so that an innocent purchaser doesn't fall into that trap and buy looted goods.
When we first started doing the show, I immediately looked up and read a piece that you'd written in The Conversation, one of our favorite publications. And I was pretty surprised. You said that 50 to 100,000 artworks are stolen globally, and there's a 10% recovery rate on this stuff.
Yes. So, most of these thefts just don't make the news, right? A lot of these thefts are from private homes. As I said, storage units. It's a really popular place for thieves to strike. But these thefts are reported to perhaps local law enforcement, to insurance companies, but most of them are not so widely announced as the Louvre theft. And unfortunately, very few works are returned because it's really hard to find stolen art. The whole kind of strategy that thieves use is hide the stolen art, put it underground, perhaps wait a couple years, or sell the art through unscrupulous dealers, through a black market, on the internet, perhaps with the wrong title. When you think about artworks that are stolen, they don't come with a label that has the artist's name, that has the title of the work. So something can be sold online as landscape with a tree. That's really hard to find for an owner. It's really hard to find for law enforcement to find these objects. So a lot of the objects simply are lost. to the wider market.
There's a sense, and I'd love to know how you feel about this, but I think people think that people who are not involved in this, they are not either thieves or museum owners or anybody like that. They think it's harmless fun. I think it's harmless fun. It was one of those things where, on Monday morning after the Louvre heist, it was what people wanted to talk about. And, there's this sense, well, if nobody gets killed, this is just kind of cool and it involves some strategies and it reminds you of certain movies. I think in general, we find this stuff kind of entertaining. I don't know whether we should or not.
So I would say you should not find it entertaining. So while following the story has been really interesting and entertaining in the sense that the thieves actually were really creative, right? They disguised themselves as construction workers. They put on the vest. And then, of course, all the bungling of the theft made it kind of entertaining that they dropped items, they left DNA behind. And then, of course, subsequent revelations about the Louvre security password being Louvre. These things are kind of comical because it's just really poor security. However, this isn't victimless, I would say, for a few reasons. One reason is that this actually belongs to humanity. These objects are objects of cultural heritage that belong to the public. It's part of our shared history. So when thieves steal this type of art, it really is a theft from the public. But more than that, often the proceeds from these thefts are circulated amongst criminals, thieves, gangs. These aren't these glamorous people that we see in movies, or there's even a show, a Netflix series, Lupin, where the kind of gentleman thief with very noble aspirations goes and steals a very valuable piece of jewelry from the Louvre. We're not dealing with these, fictional characters, but rather people that generally are part of gangs that may be committing violence, that could be using their proceeds as part of a criminal syndicate and kind of collateral between gangs. So these really aren't victimless crimes. They affect all of us. And generally they're not gentlemen committing these types of malfeasances.
Now, given the way that you answered the previous question, this question is going to be even more impertinent than it was going to be. I just sort of I was thinking today, you've been looking at this stuff for a long time, and you know a lot about it. You know a lot of cases, and you certainly see a lot of cases that are, in various ways, to use the word you just used, bungled. Is there any part of you, or like even the gardener, they took the wrong stuff. They didn't know which stuff was really valuable, which would seem to me to be a major research point if you're planning a big heist. Is there any part of you that ever thinks, I could do this way better? I would be so good at this.
I think that all of the time. And I actually say that to students. One of my pieces of advice for criminals is don't write down the information. My students and I discuss cases in my course where law enforcement is able to put the puzzle together because of evidence left behind by criminals, either, pieces that they drop, DNA evidence that is left behind, but also paperwork. There's this really well-known looting network that had operated in Italy in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and people who were part of that network took Polaroid photos of works that were looted, and they wrote letters, and they had a organogram that described the different dealers who they were using to get looted items onto the market. So criminals sometimes like writing about their exploits. They put information in journals. They drop material. But ultimately, I think one of the problems is that when you are involved in a heist like this that involves many people, you're actually trusting criminals. And for me, I don't think I could ever trust a criminal. So I know that art crime is not the business for me. I'm not trusting enough to trust other criminals.
Oh, I love the idea that they're like making flow charts.
Yeah,
You
it's
don't do
shocking.
that. What you do is you go to a restaurant, you go to a diner, and then you explain the whole thing on the placemat, and you say, okay, the salt is where the jewels are, okay? You're the ketchup over here. There's some movie where that happened. I can't remember which movie it is. But yeah, you just do it there, and then you leave the restaurant. Nobody knows you were planning a heist. We should say a little, I mean, this stuff is hard to move. The more famous it is, the harder it is to move. And although I guess the fact that it's jewels this time would have made it a little bit easier to find a fence.
Yeah, and that's what's so troubling about the case. If you steal well-known fine art, you're not going to damage it. Or you shouldn't damage it. The times when fine artworks are damaged or destroyed is when thieves get worried, they make a mistake somewhere along the line, realize too late that they cannot resell the work, so then they destroy it. However, for the most part, thieves don't want to damage stolen art. Right? You need to keep it in its entirety. You need to protect it, and it will sell for money on the market because it's unique and there's value there. The problem with the objects, like the pieces that were stolen, is they're jewels, they're large jeweled pieces. The jewels can just be taken apart. The objects are dismantled and then sold on the market. If the thieves are smart, they don't sell it with one dealer. Perhaps they distribute the jewels. So half the sapphires go to one dealer, the other half go to another. The dealers will cut the dealers and jewelers will recut, reshape, disguise the jewels and put them on the market. And that's what's so troubling here, that these objects are easier to move than the fine art pieces.
We were saying something before about a famous painting, but one of the ironies is that the Mona Lisa was stolen in 1911. It wasn't probably the most famous painting in the world at that time. It probably is the most famous painting, at least in the Western world now. And that, I gather, being stolen is a little bit a part of the cachet, or added to the cachet, that makes it so famous.
It is true, because people like theft stories, people like you. And you're absolutely right that the Mona Lisa is, I think, the world's best known painting. And I know that it's valued at over $1 billion. And in part because it was stolen and that there was this international effort to try to recover it. It was advertised in newspapers around the world. And of course, it's a significant work. It's Leonardo da Vinci, one of the few paintings that was completed and that's on the market and that has perfect provenance. We know exactly where it came from, and it was left to a French king. And all that adds to its cachet and its value. But the theft was definitely part of the story. And there are other works that have this similar story. There are two versions of The Scream by Edvard Munch were stolen, and one of those works ended up at one point in time breaking the record for works sold at auction for its high price. The works at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum are also very well known now and are incredibly valuable, with one of the works being a Vermeer being valued at about $250 million. So these stories about works that are stolen and returned do add to the value of the works. And this is also true for works that were looted by the Nazis and then ultimately returned through litigation and through efforts made by governments to return stolen and looted works.
Yeah, and that second Munch heist, it sort of raised the '04 one. It raises questions about what's a heist, this was an armed robbery, essentially. They just went in with guns, right, and made the tourists lie down on the floor and took the bait. This wasn't some elaborately Ocean's 11 sketched out thing that nobody would know what was happening.
No, that was just a violent heist. And what's so interesting is, I think the first heist was really interesting because thieves did kind of what happened at the Louvre. And with the first Munch heist, thieves put a ladder up to a second floor window, went into the museum after it was closed. It was a bathroom window. They just went in, took the painting, and then actually left a note for security that said,
That's right.
"Thanks for the poor security." And that's kind of what happened here with the Louvre. They went through a second floor window with more advanced technology and during museum hours, but they went through this second floor window that wasn't secured. They went in, took the works, and they didn't leave a note saying thanks for the poor security, but now the whole world is talking about poor security.
Let's end here with the kind of the aftermath of these things. I would argue that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum got way more famous than I'm sure there are people who go there now just because they watch the Netflix thing or listen to the podcast or something. In that sense, I take your point about donors saying, what the hell am I giving you all this money for if you can't hold on to the art? But I'm also thinking this has got to be a wake-up call. First of all, nobody's ever going to get password shamed again the way the Louvre did. I mean, everybody, I'm sure, is just really updating their passwords. But I would just assume, museums ultimately aren't in the business of not having their art stolen. That's sort of a secondary or tertiary agenda on any given day. They're in the business of showing art and getting people to come see it. But I would imagine it does just put people on high alert, and at least for a short time, people try to fix whatever loopholes they have.
I agree. I think it puts museums on alert that they really need to step up some of their security. And I think it also should put private collectors on alert as well, because the vast majority of these thefts occur in private homes. But one thing I would like to note is, everyone's laughing about the poor security at the Louvre, but security is very expensive.
Yeah.
It's just a reality that there isn't enough money for museums and cultural institutions, and securing every object and protecting against thefts, and also paying for the protection of art by conserving the art and having works displayed in the proper humidity and temperature. All of that's really expensive. So even though everyone's laughing about the Louvre, I think that the Louvre faces a lot of challenges, just like any large museum, because of limited resources and an exorbitant amount of threats.
Leila, Amineddoleh, so great to have you back on the show. Our guest teaches art crime at New York University and cultural heritage law at Fordham Law School, is the chair of the art law group at Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogin. She is not an international art thief, although she probably would be a pretty good one if she ever took it up. All right, thanks for being with us. We're going to take a little break. We're going to talk about those movies that get people thinking that maybe they could steal a painting.
Yeah. Well, no matter if you build a house, or rob a bank, or make a record, it's a job. And when the job is done, you gotta know how to celebrate.
Ain't no job like robbing a casino. We want that spot, dress up in a tuxedo. Champagne popping is better than a dream, yo. Living in a plot by Quentin Tarantino. Now we're on top like a criminal hero. Start to live it up, take a trip to Montego. To the left, to the right.
So, I'm sitting here right now with my two guests. We're like three regular guys. And they do what they gotta do. And I do what I gotta do. And if I have to put one of them down, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to do it.
Joining us now is Glen Weldon, and the host of NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour, which I've just ensured I will never be invited to be on. And he also reviews books, movies, comics, and more for the NPR Arts Desk. Also with us is John DeVore, culture writer and author of Theater Kids, A True Tale of Off Broadway. We are going to talk about the way movies reflect heists, and maybe they reflect back and forth upon one another. But just to give you a sense of how incredibly saturated we are with that kind of popular culture. When the Louvre heist went down, I was with my son, and we saw the news come on, and the first couple of things he saw about it, he turned to me and goes, well, that's like Lupin. And right at that moment, the news anchor said this, B1.
It all happened in just 7 minutes. A brazen daylight heist at the most visited museum in the world around 9:30 this morning. And tonight, those thieves still on the run. The robbery so dramatic, like a scene out of the Netflix show Lupin.
Okay, nobody coached her on how to say Lupin. But other than that, you can't get away from it. And Glenn, I think the difference is, and Leila kind of alluded to this too. Most of these people who do this stuff look a lot more like Ricky Jay than they look like George Clooney, right? I mean, we've sort of, part of the fun of these movies is the glamorization of the people who do this stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, we always imagine it's going to be Tom Cruise being lowered from the ceiling or Catherine Zeta-Jones slithering through some lasers in a catsuit, but it's just a couple of dudes who slapped on some vests and climbed a ladder truck. So it's within reach. That's the thing about it.
So there's a lot of things that are heist movies, and there's a lot of things that you could maybe have an argument about whether or not it's a heist movie. And I did do a little bit from the famous restaurant scene of Heat, not necessarily very well, but maybe we should talk about that whole idea, John, or whoever I don't know. Are you both Heat experts? I'm a Heat expert as well. But we talk. I mean, this is an interesting movie because they want to be in the heist business. The problem is it keeps getting a little bit more complicated than they want it to be.
Right. So I think, heist movies, there are subcategories. And, Heat buckets under what I'd call like a morality play. It's a crime doesn't pay movie. We root for the anti-heroes, but things don't go well for them. Ocean's 11, on the other hand, is pure fantasy. And that's kind of my favorite sort of movie. But no, I love Heat.
And I mean, some of that heat, too, is reflected in the way that, I think these movies are better when they're about more than just heists. And so I'm going to play a little bit more of that conversation. This is De Niro as Neil McCauley, the guy who's running a crew. And he talks about what he calls the discipline. This is B3.
Guy told me one time, don't let yourself get attached to anything you are not willing to walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you feel the heat around the corner. Now, if you're on me and you got to move when I move, how do you expect to keep a marriage?
That's an interesting point.
And,
I love it.
Yeah. Some of the fun of that is he's talking about the discipline he needs to be effective at hitting armored cars and banks and stuff like that. But it's also clearly going to define him in the rest of his life.
My favorite line in the movie is Tom Sizemore saying the action is the juice.
The juice, yes.
These are what I love about Heat is these are guys who are good at their job. It's not just the money. They have a code.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing about a heist movie, it's the point of view of it, right? We are part of it. We're in on it. We're both invested and we're implicated because we're rooting for the crooks, as you say. But equally important is who we're rooting against, right? As John has written about, it's big, faceless institutions like banks and insurance companies with whom it is impossible to sympathize. And also these movies speak to us because of human nature. Everyone has walked into a bank and kind of cased the joint, right? You look where the cameras are, you see that there's 3 guards. And what the heist film offers you, as you all mentioned, is competence, process, step-by-step process, the illusion that all you need to overcome an institution is meticulous planning and elaborate execution. But if that happens, you don't have a story.
Well, I will stop talking about Heat in just a second. But in fact, De Niro, when he walks into the bank, he says, we want to hurt no one. We're here for the bank's money, not your money. Your money is insured by the federal government. You're not going to lose a dime. It's like that subtext that you're talking about right now that we expect the audience to have. He makes sure that they have that subtext.
Victimless crime.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's talk about, the other glamorous one that we've alluded to is the Oceans series. Let's hear a little bit from one of those. You're going to hear George Clooney as Danny Ocean, Brad Pitt as Rusty Ryan. This is B2.
This is probably the least accessible vault ever designed.
Yep.
You said 3 casinos?
These feed into the cages at the Mirage, the MGM Grand, but every dime ends up there.
The Bellagio, the Mirage. These are Terry Benedict's places.
Yes, they are. You think you'll mind?
More than somewhat.
So, John, let's talk a little bit about this. This is the more glamorous end. And sometimes the Ocean's movies also just feel like a lot of cool actors getting, as they were in the first iteration with Sinatra, just some really cool actors getting together to have some fun together. But the movie's got to work. So how does it work, John?
Yeah, so there's none of the moral sort of crime conversation happening in Ocean's 11 like there is in Heat or Reservoir Dogs or Rafifi, any of the great heist crime movies. Ocean's 11 is a dude's rock movie. It is a movie about talented people doing a good job. And that's why I love it. I have friends that have always, growing up, I had a friend that was like, let's start a bar, like, in my friend group. And then I'm the guy who's like, no, let's form a heist crew. What's your job? That to me is the fun of Ocean's 11.
And I think what's going on here is that there's maybe it's a distinction without a difference, but I think there's heist films and there are caper films, and I think films like the Ocean's movies are caper films because everyone looks great and there's not a lot, nobody really sweats it, and they all look great in tuxedos. My heart goes to the scuzzier, more cutthroat heist movies like Dog Day Afternoon, where that's an Al Pacino film where you can tell from the jump that it's going to go south. Give me Stanley Kubrick's 1956 film The Killing, which stars Sterling Hayden as a crook who tries to put a team together to rob a racetrack, and everybody he tries to bring into the circle of trust is just a red flag. You're like, don't trust this guy. What are you doing? I love that.
Kubrick made that when I think he was 28 years old. It was kind of the first real full-blown feature he'd done. And it feels the whole time like it's either a B movie trying to become an A movie or an A movie in danger of sliding into being a B movie. And I'm not really sure where it comes out. But, Glenn, when you say that, I think also within the sort of heist and caper dynamic, there are also movies that they're not maybe down and dirty and grungy like The Killers, but like The Italian Job, where they're really, really focused on how this, like, I don't really care what Neil McCauley's plans are in Heat, but there are movies where they make you want to care a lot about the nuts and bolts of the operation, right, Glenn?
Absolutely, and everybody has a job. That's the other key part of a heist film. You've got people who have, you need the mastermind, the inside guy, the hacker. Somebody in the film needs to say, I'm in, because otherwise you don't got a movie. Safecrackers and demolitions guys, distractions,
Masters of Disguise.
Masters of Disguise. Bonus points if one or more of them are doing it one last time. This is my last job.
Right, but that's another great subcategory, though, is the last score. I think we could even subcategorize heist movies into where they are in their heist timeline.
Absolutely. And you also need to lay out the plan for us, right? We need to see the challenge, the security system, the guards, the cameras, the alarms. Bonus points if they got a scale model or a blueprint, or I guess nowadays a hologram. And then the mastermind outlines the plan. And that's the scene where the series of scenes where we see what's going to happen if it all goes right.
Well, you're skipping over a trope, which is when they put the team together. And typically, this is, by the way, so formulaic that Rick and Morty recently had one where they put a heist team together, starting with Mr. Poopy Butthole. And the key with that is Mr. Poopy Butthole, when they find him, he's teaching a college course about Maya Angelou. And part of the idea when you go to get your team, your crew, each of them is doing something else.
Right.
Or Dennis Haysbert is a short order cook in Heat, but they're doing the thing that they don't want to do, and then maybe they're going to tell you, "Well, I don't do the heist stuff anymore," and then they're going to be talked into it.
But that would be
and the Blues Brothers,
that would be an incredible trope to live through. To have an old friend come to you and recruit you. I've waited my whole life to be recruited for a caper.
Well, call up your childhood friends. Say, okay, I'm ready. Let's do it. All right, let's talk about a movie that you like, Glenn, and I would agree not that many people have seen this movie. It's called Widows.
Great.
It's sort of like, to go back to Heat, if Ashley Judd and Diane Venora and Amy Brenneman decided that they were just going to start robbing banks. That's what happens in Widows. We'll play a little clip, and then maybe Glenn can say a bit about it. You're going to hear Viola Davis as Veronica Rawlings.
We got to start thinking like professionals. We're in business together. There's not going to be some cozy reunion. After this job, we're done. We have 3 days to look and move like a team of men. The best thing we have going for us is being who we are. Why? Because no one thinks we have the balls to pull this off.
Terrific.
I guarantee you some studio head said, okay, that's going in the trailer when she says that thing about how we don't have balls. But yeah, Glenn, tell us a little bit about Widows.
Yeah, and also you mentioned One Last Job. This is the 2018 film Widows, stars Viola Davis, Michelle Rodriguez, Elizabeth Debicki as widows of Chicago bank robbers. This is a very Chicago movie, who owe the mob money, and they set out to rob it from a crooked politician played by Colin Farrell. What I love about this movie is it does what a heist job does perfectly, which is it gets messy. If the plan does go off like clockwork, you've just spent an hour and a half watching a clock. No one wants to do that. It needs monkey wrenches. It needs to go off the rails. And this film starts off the rails, flies all the way off them, and there is a twist that you're not going to see coming that makes you question a lot of the assumptions you've made in the beginning of the film. That's what a heist film should do.
I love that you brought up Widows because it has such emotional stakes for the genre and a political dimension that I thought that was also pretty great.
Yeah, and part of the idea is that their husbands were all criminals, and one of them left after he died. They discovered he'd left behind the plans for what was going to be the last job. So they think, oh, we could do this. It's not that hard. Let's go to the gun range. So yeah, I'd like maybe each of you. This is something we necessarily prepared to talk about, but as I was thinking about this, I was thinking this gets tried a lot on television. I actually grew up as a kid with a series called T.H.E. Cat that started the young Bob Loggia, and then there was It Takes the Thief, which had Robert Wagner and Fred Astaire as his father, which was just so wonderful. And obviously Lupin was a series. But, I do wonder, and either one of you can respond, I think there's a sort of platonic, perfect 2 to 2.5 hour form to these things. I mean, they tried Kaleidoscope recently. Giancarlo Esposito is about as hot as he's ever going to get as an actor. And it just didn't really work. And I wonder if it is because we can't really stay with this more than maybe a couple of hours.
Go on, Glenn.
No. I mean, I think the idea is if you do a different caper or different heist every week, then maybe you got something there. But if it's one job stretched out over an entire season, then yeah, I think it's diminishing returns.
It's funny that you bring that up, though, because over the summer I wrote a bunch about the last Mission Impossible movie, and so I watched the TV series for the first time. I never watched it; it's on Amazon Prime, and I realized that the formula was crazy, irresistible, but it's the same bones of a caper. It's how do we pull off the impossible mission, and it has sometimes blueprints. It has masters of disguise. For it to work, it would have to be a different caper like every episode, not over the course of one, I think.
It's interesting you mentioned this too, because my son and I just watched in sequence all of the Mission Impossible movies, and it is weird because they're like 4 different kinds of movies per movie. And one of the things is a heist movie. And Ving Rhames almost always has one of those knit hats on that you wear if you're a heist burglar kind of guy. But it's a
hacker.
Yeah, he's a hacker.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's just it's kind of everything all at once. I want to ask you both, and I'll start with you, Glenn. This has already been sort of mentioned, but I'll put it. I'll give a quick anecdote, which is my father did not know what to talk to his mother-in-law about, my grandmother, and they would have to take these long car rides together, and they didn't know what to talk about. And then one day they were driving by a bank, and my father mentioned that it had been robbed, and my grandmother mentioned quite a few details about this. She knew quite a bit, and it turned out they both knew a lot about bank robberies, and were probably pretty interested. I was always worried they were going to try to rob a bank together, but Glenn, there is a part in most of us that watches these movies and maybe thinks about, how would I handle this? Or would I do this? Or, I mean, I think we're there a little bit as characters.
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing. You want to be in the mix. You want to be implicated, as I say. And there's a movie that came out a while ago called Hell or High Water, which looks into something that most of these movies never do, which is motivation. The crooks in that film are farmers whose farm has been foreclosed on because of a crooked second mortgage or reverse mortgage, and they're robbing from branches of the bank that screwed them over. And so that becomes, you talk about being implicated, you talk about being feeling like involved. Anybody who's suffered at the hands of a bank is like, yeah, go for it.
And John, that gets us back to the Robin Hood idea, right?
Right. Take from the rich, give to the poor. Glenn brought up Dog Day Afternoon, which I recently rewatched. My wife agreed to watch it for the first time. It was a big deal in my house. And it occurred to me, the motivation in Dog Day Afternoon is healthcare. Al Pacino's character wants to pay for his lover's transition surgery. And it kind of blew me away because I've recently, for instance, helped my mother with her hip surgery. And I've had thoughts in my head where I'm like, yeah, the insurance will pay for this. But what if I rob the bank?
Hell or High Water, but I think it's a Taylor Sheridan script too. I mean, he probably wrote it, on a Friday or something. And
Absolutely.
Okay, we're all done. I'll invent a new TV series tomorrow. So yeah, we have to go. I do want to just share with you, because I think we do sometimes find life advice in these movies. So there's a Mammoth film called Heist. So it's about heists. Yeah, you're all kind of gasping about that. And Gene Hackman is sort of the mastermind. And at the end, or near the end, I think that one of the law enforcement people says to him, "You're a pretty smart guy," and he goes, "I'm not all that smart." And the guy says, "Well, how'd you figure it out then?" And he said, "I tried to imagine a fella smarter than myself. Then I tried to think, what would he do?" Uh, which I think is great advice, generally speaking, even if
life
you're
advice.
not doing a heist or something. And so, have you guys seen Heist? By the way, one of you sounded like me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's a weird one because I think Hackman's blown, right? He took off his mask in his penultimate job, so he can only do one more job now.
Right.
So it goes right into that whole idea of the last job. Well, listen, does each of you, we got to go here, but you want to make a quick recommendation, each one, if you're going to watch one heist movie this weekend? Glenn, you go first.
Sure. Logan Lucky, 2018 film, is a movie about a heist of a raceway that involves the pneumatic tubes that the raceway uses to transfer cash underground.
That is funny. A really fun movie. I totally agree. And how about you, John?
I'm going to suggest either the 1968 Steve McQueen, Thomas Crown Affair, or the 1999 one. I think it's a really underrated movie. I think it's a really adult movie. Great Renee Russo.
Yeah, I was going to mention her. All right, thanks so much for spending some time with us today to talk about all of these wonderful movies that entertain us so much. Glen Weldon is host of NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour podcast. John DeVore, culture writer and author of Theater Kids, A True Tale of Off-Broadway. All right, we'll be back.
And own it, drive it like you stole it, roll it, this is your life, you can be anything, you gotta learn to rock and roll it, you gotta put the pedals down, and drive it like you stole it, and drive it like you stole it, and drive it like you stole it.
Okay, to put together this episode, I had to put together a crew. So my tech guy is Dylan Reyes. He is my tech guy all the time, actually. And the ruthless criminal mastermind is, of course, Lily Tyson. And that's the whole team. I think I'm the wheel guy. I'm the driver. I'll be driving us away in my Subaru Outback. All right, we're going to talk about something that has fascinated me from the first day that I read about it many, many years ago, and that is the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. It really is a thing. Here to talk about it is Peter Kuitenbrouwer, who is a journalist and registered professional forester. He's the author of Maple Syrup, A Short History of Canada's Sweetest Obsession. Peter, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Colin.
And so let's begin at the beginning, which is to understand this story, you have to know that Canada, because this is such an incredibly important product for Canada, they have a strategic maple syrup reserve, correct?
Yes, because if you think about it, on a year when there's a lot of cold nights and warm days, the sap will flow freely and you can produce a heck of a lot of maple syrup. And that what ends up happening is that you can kill the price because there's too much maple syrup on the market. So what they do is they set a price and they stockpile maple syrup that they don't sell for a year when there might be less favorable weather.
Now, that means that in some instances there will be a boom year, and then there'll be a lot of barrels that nobody ever really looks at for a while. And there were some thieves who ultimately decided maybe they could exploit that, right? Maybe. And we should say there's a lot of money that we're talking about here. Quebec in 2023 exported about $368 million worth of maple syrup to the U.S. So say a little bit about how this heist went down.
Well, so you have to picture there's a warehouse, and in the morning they would bring in barrels of maple syrup and stockpile them and start stacking them in stacks about 6 barrels high. Picture a barrel, like an oil barrel, like 45-gallon drum. So you've got hundreds and thousands of these barrels building up in the warehouse. It turns out that the guy who had the key to the warehouse decided that this was a good opportunity to steal the syrup. And so he and his co-conspirators, basically what happened was they created 100 barrels that were the exact same color of paint as the barrels that had the syrup in them, filled them with water, backed up a truck, unloaded the barrels filled with water and loaded on the barrels filled with syrup and pulled away with those. And then they had to, of course, drain it into a different vessel, the syrup that they had stolen, and bring back the barrels filled with water, etc. And they did this for a year.
And didn't they get sloppy at a certain point where they thought, this is a lot of work. Why don't we just siphon the maple syrup right out of the barrels and leave them there?
That may have been how they did it, or else they simply replaced full barrels with empty barrels And so they stacked them 6 high. And so what happened, Colin, was that one day an auditor showed up, and according to his records, there were, I think, 10 or 12,000 barrels of maple syrup in the warehouse. So he was quite, thorough in his audit, and he climbed the barrels. The problem is that when he got to the top, the barrel that he reached to grab onto was empty, and he almost fell. And so then they started going, wait a second, there's no maple syrup in these barrels. And they ended up discovering that more than 9,000 barrels were either empty or filled with water.
They wound up, I think, arresting 17 people, which right away tells you a problem. 17 there's like a Dunbar's number for heist crews, and 17 people's way too big. But do we know anything else about how they caught who they caught?
Yeah, well, I mean, it turned out that the ringleader was somebody that they knew from before, because in Quebec, not only is there maple syrup theft, but there's something called rollers, because there's another sort of wrinkle to this whole thing, which is that in maple syrup is controlled by this cartel, this federation, and some people try to sell maple syrup on the black market. So there is a black market, and there are people who deal in the black market. The guy who was the sort of ringleader, he turned it out to be a guy named Richard Valliere, turned out to be a guy who had been involved in the black market in the past. So they figured he was probably in on the scheme, and then they found out that he knew a guy who was a truck driver, and the truck driver's dad was in on the scheme, and then they figured out that the guy with the keys to the warehouse. So they ended up having about 75 cell phones that they were getting records from, and then they gradually pieced it together.
We used to say, we were talking about popular culture in the previous segment. There is a black comedy series set in Quebec called The Sticky, which they say is not really based on the heist, but it clearly is inspired by the heist. Has Margot Martindale in it. I guess we have time for one last thing here, which is, whenever I go to Montreal, I either go up to Jean Talon or down to Outwater and, buy some of the maple syrup and usually get it in a can, and you realize it's almost hard to think what the American comparable product is. That I would imagine that this heist wasn't just a casual thing for a lot of Canadians, because maple syrup, I don't know. I mean, it's just so literally organically part of Canadian culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Somebody else asked me the question the other day, why are we so obsessed with this product? And one of the things, is that back in 1916, there was a law passed by the Parliament of Canada called the Adulteration Act. And so you cannot put anything on a shelf in Canada that you call maple syrup unless it is 100% pure maple syrup. And those kind of laws don't exist in the States. So I think Canadians, we have a reverence for something that we know exactly what it is supposed to taste like. And when we get some stuff that's good, and then there's, of course, artisanal maple syrup, Colin, that's more precious than the stuff that maybe is more mass produced by large outfits using tubing and more industrial processes.
There's the flag. There's the hockey team.
Well, exactly.
Maple Leafs are kind of a thing. All right, Peter Kuitenbrouwer, I'm sorry, we've run out of time here. Journalist and registered professional forester, author of Maple Syrup, A Short History of Canada's Sweetest Obsession. We will have to go now, but thank you don't do a heist. Let me just say it a different way. If you do a heist, don't tell anybody that you got the idea from listening to this episode.
Messiahs, people dying